Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And from the left, I'm David Jones.
Tonight we welcome Professor BartonSmith of the Department of Economics at the University of Houston, but he's also known as the regional Nostradamus, the person who tells us what the future is, David.
That's
Isn't
right.
That great?
I think you've got a title that you would even be better at describing than what Gary just tried to get out. What is that?
Well, I am the director of the Institute for Regional Forecasting at U of H.
Okay, well, there you go. Nostradamus. Nostradamus forecasts the future. So who's the next president?
The future does not look good to a lot of people, that's for sure. But before we talk about how dire our circumstances are nationally, you know, we're reading about budget cuts at the city and layoffs at school districts, Fort Bend and HISD, and libraries are shutting down. I mean, when is this going to get better for our local economy?
Well, it's already starting to get better for our local economy. I mean, it surprised me that we're actually seeing a small amount of job growth, and have since September. It's minuscule at this point. It's very scattered, but it's come quicker than we thought. My wisdom was a year and a half ago is that Houston was late in getting into the recession. It would be late at coming out of the recession. We seem to be right on target with the national economy.
So what do you account for the fact that our recession could end up being shorter than what everyone else has experienced in the country?
A part of it is $85 a barrel oil. that is certainly helping. And but even our energy sector right now is a confusing mix. We've got unusually strong oil prices for a global economy that continues to struggle. On the other hand, natural gas prices are extremely low.
Is there something we should be doing then with natural gas to take advantage of this low price?
Well, the U.S. should have been moving towards natural gas for a long time. It's a cleaner gas. It's a supply of energy that we've got a much larger supply of. The wisdom was just 4 or 5 years ago that we had at least 50 years of reserves of natural gas. And natural gas prices were very high in 2006 and 2007. We went in an exploration boom, and we discovered reserves of natural gas everywhere in this country. I mean, North Dakota and Utah, in Colorado, and the northern part of New Mexico, and part of the problem of natural gas right now is the success at which we found so much new reserves, and so we've got an excess supply of natural gas. But now people are easily talking about 100 years of supply of natural gas. So that's one of the things that we ought to be doing in this country, is moving towards.
Could we have natural gas powered cars, for example?
Absolutely. There are a lot of problems with natural gas powered cars. I did a study about 8 years ago with regards to hydrogen powered. The advantage of hydrogen, in one sense, the advantage of hydrogen is that for the most part we would be making hydrogen out of our enormous coal reserves in this country. That would be on the positive side. The negative side is that you can't convert coal into hydrogen without producing a lot of carbon dioxide. And the carbon dioxide can be sequestered, but at a price. And the other problem with the hydrogen, unlike natural gas, is hydrogen would have to be made available in compressed form.
So you're a scientist, not just an economist. This is impressive, I must say.
That's good. I say natural gas cars.
We have to be pleased that the energy industry is doing well at $85 a barrel, and yet higher gasoline prices are taking money out of budgets of people. And that is money that's not being spent, that is going towards sales tax that's coming back to the city. And certainly Houston doesn't get its fair share of gas tax money back. So city budgets and county budgets are still going to be squeezed, aren't they?
They're going to be squeezed for multiple reasons. I mean, there isn't a single reason. They're going to be squeezed right now because temporarily we've seen sales tax revenues plummet. And that's associated with the decline in business investment in Houston. Most Houstonians don't understand that half of all of the sales tax revenues in our region are business-to-business transactions. They're not you and I going to the mall. And when the economy goes into a slump like it is right now, business investment dries up, and the taxable items in which businesses buy from each other diminishes significantly. So we've seen a significant drop in sales tax revenues. In addition to that, Houston's participating in another kind of a financial crisis in America right now, and that has to do with commercial real estate. I won't go into the details of the problems of commercial real estate, but nationwide we've seen commercial real estate prices fall more than home prices fell. Right now, commercial real estate prices are down about 44% off their peak. It's probably not nearly that high in Houston, but nonetheless, we've seen a significant decline in commercial real estate prices that are affecting the city of Houston's tax rolls on the property tax side. And so, the bottom line is there's going to be some real tough decisions that are going to have to be made in the public sector in the next 2 to 3 years.
Is part of the problem, for example, the city of Houston being, I guess, actuarially unsound in how you funded the pension plans that have created problems also?
Well, I wouldn't blame it on the city of Houston. I mean, the city of Houston's participated in that as well. One of this nation's problems are unfunded liabilities. We have unfunded liabilities with regards to the pensions of federal employees, and corporate America. What brought GM down really was an unfunded liability with their pension fund. One of the interesting stories that doesn't get a lot of play in the media is that Japan's facing something similar, because rather than Social Security and government being the primary source of the support of the retired population, corporate Japan is the support of retired corporation, and they've been playing the same game that that GM was playing, and it's starting to build where these Japanese corporations are going to have an enormous liability of retired people, in which the Japanese, just like the Americans, are living longer and longer.
Yeah. So I understand that several of our states could be approaching Greece status in terms of their the ratio of their debt to their state product, especially if you count the market value of these pension liabilities, which is not known. So if the European Union says that at 60%, this debt to state product is where it gets dangerous for one of their countries, and we have 7 or 8 of our states that are approaching that from my reading of this material, what's the worst that could happen here should several of these states become Greece?
I seriously doubt whether we're going to see a default. But what we are going to see, and we are already beginning to see it, is a significant cutback in government services. I live part-time in Colorado, part-time in Houston. I see what Houston's starting to have to go through. We're starting to cut. State of Texas is starting to cut. We've gotten mandates at the University of Houston from the state that we've had to reduce a budget that we thought was secure because we got through the biennium before the crash hit. So all states are having to cut. Some states are having to make severe cuts. In Colorado, where I live part-time, the state legislature has made painful cuts in the state budget, and they still have over $1 billion deficit.
Dr. Smith, is that a reflection on the fact that government everywhere has been overspending and overpromising for years and years, and now the chickens are coming home to roost?
I think that may be part of the story, but I really like the story about the unfunded liabilities. Governments at every level have been funding pension funds and other types of funds that don't appear on today's balance sheet. They're on future balance sheets, and so we don't worry about it. But we've been building up these liabilities to a point. San Antonio, by the way, you may or may not know this, back in the 90s, almost went bankrupt because of their pension fund problems. It's a serious problem.
But the problem is it's not sustainable forever.
No, absolutely.
So what is the end game? Repudiation? Runaway inflation? Print dollars? Throw them from the sky? I mean, what are these different governments going to do? They're not going to be able to fund these promises they made because they're already having to cut services, as you've explained now, in the current economic climate. And I understand we're in a recession where government revenue goes down, but the economy is still going to be cyclical, so we may have an upturn of some point for a while, but they could come back and have another downturn. And things get worse and worse over time with the unfunded liabilities. I think it's...
Step number one. Step number one is to stop the current bleeding. I mean, we've got this debt, we've got this problem in the future, but let's stop the current bleeding. Let's renegotiate the whole notion of public sector pensions and what you've got coming to you. We need Americans to save on their own. So what we've got to say is we've got to create public sector funds that say, okay, we're going to contribute this much to your retirement. What are you going to contribute to the retirement? The University of Houston, i.e. the state of Texas, has contributed to my retirement. I have contributed at a matching amount to that retirement, and I can contribute more. And that retirement was not unfunded. That retirement was put in stocks, put in bonds, and so forth. We need to move the public sector in that general direction, as opposed to saying when you turn 65, we're guaranteeing your income at 2/3 of your salary for the rest of your life. We can't do that because, surprisingly, 10 years from now, you may end up even having a longer lifetime span than we thought.
Oh, and he'll be working until he's 80. We had the Fed chairman recently say that the math that you're talking about and referring to is unfortunate, referring to the budget problems of the United States, and he gave 3 options in this speech that I heard. We can have higher taxes to start reducing or approaching, reductions of this debt by paying it down, and we can modify Social Security and Medicare payments, or we can do some combination of those two. What would you say about our capacity to have more revenue coming in, given the wealth of the United States and the amount that we're actually bringing in versus that wealth?
What David says is, what can we raise taxes on?
The Fed chairman says that's an option, of course.
I think it is an option. I think the answer to all these ideas of what we need to do to bring the federal deficit under control, the answer is D, all of the above. There's not a world that I can imagine right now that we can balance the federal budget without increasing taxes. But it's got to be accommodated by a whole host of other things, including the reduction of federal government. One of the things, though, that we talk about when we talk about the federal government, those on the right that would shouting big government, you need to understand what you mean by big government. If you take a look at the number of federal government employees since the 1950s, it's been in steady decline for the last 4 to 5 decades. Government, in one sense, is shrinking. Government, in another sense, is increasing at an enormous pace. And that's what we refer to in economics as transfer payments. Now, transfer payments include that category that we call entitlements, but it also includes a lot of subsidies and so forth. I talked to an audience this morning, and I said, why in the world are we spending millions of dollars to get people to stop smoking in this country at the same time that we're subsidizing tobacco farmers? We've got to bring the 68% of the federal budget is engaged in transfer payments.
So we need to look for solutions, apparently, on the political side, not with the respected members of your profession who know some answers. Our problem is democracy. Is that what you're suggesting?
And it's not just the politicians. We have a tendency to blame the politicians. But the bottom line is it's us. We want it, but we don't want to pay for it. And so we just as soon we would just as soon have more of this and more of that and cut taxes at the same time. We cannot do that.
Conservatives used to say that there's no free lunch, but we don't hear that anymore. Now it's Dick Cheney saying, Reagan proved deficits don't matter politically.
Yeah.
What Reagan proved, David, is the Reagan tax cuts proved that if you cut the federal taxes, it encouraged hard work and entrepreneurship in the country and ended up increasing revenue to the federal government. That was true, but the other half of the equation that Dr. Smith's explained is you have to control spending too. Okay? So tax cuts can work and boost the economy. Tax increases, on the other hand, at times can suppress economic activity and cause people not to work. But, Dr. Smith, you don't have to worry because David's friends in Washington already got tax increases lined up for us. We got the Bush tax cuts going away, which the Democrats will never vote to continue. Then we have the Obama tax increases for Obamacare. And then they want to have a national sales tax. I mean, they got so many wonderful tax ideas, it makes my head spin because they don't want to make the tough decisions to control spending. And I would agree with you. The Republicans, for the most part, are just as guilty.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
But it's also Americans in general. We have been over-consuming in this country.
And not working hard enough.
For a decade and a half. And we've got to bring that under control. Both government spending, but also private spending as well.
I mean, the credit economy.
But part of the problem when you talk about taxes is there's a tendency to want to oversimplify the tax story in terms of tax cuts versus tax increases and so forth. We desperately need in this country tax reform. Taxes are not just complicated. I mean, that's for the typical American, the taxes are so complicated it makes their head spin, and that's their main problem. But taxes are also distorting in a variety of ways. You're not going to like this, but I would tax capital gains like any ordinary tax. Because capital gains is taxing capital gains at half the rate or whatever it might be. Some people argue we want zero capital gains tax. That rewards you for inflated assets. What we want to reward is productivity, things that produce productivity.
So what kind of tax system would you set up?
Well, number one is anybody that thinks that we can increase the taxes on corporate America is crazy. Corporate America is in a global economy today. We've got to compete. We can't increase taxes on corporate America. But what we can do is we can alter the balance between incentives for corporations to try to inflate the books and inflate their asset prices towards becoming more productive. A simple thing. Besides my elimination of the tax break on capital gains, would be to make dividends, corporate dividends, completely deductible from the corporate point of view. Most economists, most people in finance will tell you that there's two ways for a corporation to acquire capital. They can do it through debt acquisition, selling bonds and getting capital, or they can issue stocks. And so in one sense, the interest that they pay on the debt is the cost of capital, but so is the dividends that they pay on debt as the cost of capital. They ought to be able to deduct dividends from their bottom line before corporate taxes is paid. That would be a simple thing. What we need to do is not only change the tax laws to make them simpler, but we need to change the tax laws in ways that will reward productivity and not speculation.
Well, how would you allot the responsibility of, on the political side of this debate, those who have argued for tax cuts, which over the last 8 to 10 years produced no net gain in the private sector job creation in the United States? Despite the tax cuts that Gary's referring to, not one new net job was created in that period of time, as opposed to when we had tax cuts under Clinton, which maybe they were invested more wisely. Tax increases under Clinton when we created 280,000 jobs a month.
They're unrelated. You know, I mean, that we can always take a little history here and a little history here and try to put them together and say, aha, there's a connection here. And there isn't a connection. If you want to take a look at tax cuts, and you want to look at probably the most effective tax cuts that we had, the most effective tax cuts we've ever had in this country were the tax cuts that were promoted by JFK in the 1960s. These were tax cuts that were accelerated depreciation, investment tax credits to try to get the private sector to increase investment spending in this country, and it worked, and it was successful. We went through a decade of the 50s in which the economy under the Eisenhower administration was relatively stagnant. the change. It's interesting. We've
So what you're
always
saying, the marginal tax rate cuts that Republicans like meant nothing.
Well, the marginal tax rate story to me is again misplaced. The whole idea of the marginal tax story is the story that we've got this enormously progressive tax system in this country. And the fact is that we really don't. In a report that I'm working on right now on tax options, one of the things that I take a look at is look at the average tax that different Americans of different economic status pay. The poor typically pay, and by the poor I'm talking about the working poor now, typically pay taxes somewhere in the order of around 17 to 18% of their income. The rich in this country, which I would say the rich are people earning more than $1 million, are typically paying somewhere around 24% of their taxes. We go from 18% to 24%. That's not an enormous progressive tax system. When you talk about taxes, you've got to look at the whole package. You've got to look at state taxes, just sales taxes and property taxes. You've got to look at the fact that the poor, they may not pay a dime of income tax, but they'll pay Social Security tax, Medicare tax. And if you take a look at the whole tax package, that the taxes aren't as progressive as people would believe them to be.
Dr. Smith, let's apply economics to politics, because we like talking about politics.
Sure.
There's going to be an election in November in Texas. Yes. How do you think the economy will be in Texas? And given what your opinion is, how do you think that impacts the various players that are running for election?
I think it's going to be a close call. Your question's a really good one because I do believe that you can go back in history, whether it's state elections or whether it's national elections, and the economy seems to play the most important role. Ideology somehow gets buried by major changes in the economy. The Texas economy is recovering faster than we thought. And so might that go to Perry's benefit? I think it might. The question is, will it have gone far enough, fast enough for November? And that's a question that's really kind of hard to predict. I really believed a year ago that because Houston, for example, was so late in getting into the recession, that it would be inevitably late in coming out, simply because of the adjustments to a new equilibrium were going to take longer. It hasn't been that case. If you take a look at the numbers, we're on track, if not actually slightly ahead of the national economy in terms of where we are in the recovery process. So I think it's going to be a close call. I think it may not revolve over the economy so much as some of these other issues.
So that means you don't think it's going to revolve around Bill White's management of the city's finances either?
No, I think I can see a scenario in which Perry would argue that look, we've done remarkably well in this state, and why? It's because of me, and
a little matter called the stimulus.
And a little matter called the stimulus. But it will also be the case that even though the economy will be back on its feet, the state's fiscal woes won't heal overnight. The state fiscal woes will not go away.
So it'll still be a tough session dealing with the spending.
After the election in November, we're going to have a biennium, and the legislature is going to have to meet. And there's going to be some hard issues with regards to how do we keep this, how do we balance the state budget. And that's where Bill White should focus his try to make his expertise that somehow he's a better manager, and that he can control things that Perry couldn't, because it's going to be a tough biennium in 2011.
Yeah, and they will also be redistricting, which will contribute to the madness considerably.
As usual.
You don't consult on redistricting, do you?
Exactly, no.
Well, I think that if we can close with just this, can you give the viewers out there some reason to hope for better days before the next 3 years, or is it going to be that long, do you think?
I'm much more positive about the short run than I am the intermediate run. The things that I see in the short run is a continuation of improvement. There are challenges. I made a presentation earlier this morning to a group, and I listed what some of the challenges are that we still face. We're going to see a continuation of the closing of banks, but they're mostly going to be small banks. It's going to stress the resources of the FDIC, and that's going to be a problem that we're going to have to face. There are a variety of other challenges that we face, but I see in the short run this economy gaining some momentum.
I'm glad we could close on a positive note.
The sun will come up tomorrow.
That's
David.
right. and more at another time with you, we hope,
Okay.
Dr. Smith. Thanks for being here.
You bet.
We appreciate it.
You bet.
You can view tonight's show along with a follow-up discussion if you'd like by visiting us at HoustonPBS.org. Click on red, white, and blue when you get to that site, so check that out. And until next time, get informed and get active.